So Proverbs 16, 18 through 19 says, pride goes before destruction, a haughty spirit before a fall. Better to be lowly in spirit along with the oppressed than to share plunder with the proud. The writer of Proverbs says, pride or arrogance goes before destruction. A haughty spirit or inflated ego goes before a fall. And that's the popular one. We don't always read 19, but 19 says, better to be lowly or humble along with the oppressed than to share in the plunder or the benefit of those who are proud and arrogant. We are in a Books of the Bible series, and we are in our third year in. Every summer, we try to summarize the books of the Bible, and we are working our way through the Old Testament. And we're in the minor prophets, and a minor prophet doesn't mean that he's not as important as a major prophet. It's just the length of the prophet. And we are in Obadiah. And that phrase from Proverbs 16, 18 to 19 is the summary of Obadiah. The summary of Obadiah. So if you don't ever read Obadiah and someone says, hey, what's Obadiah about? Well, it's about the proud having, the proud being destroyed and those with inflated ego falling, and that it is better to live with those who are oppressed than celebrate with the oppressor. That is the theme of Obadiah. Now, Obadiah is in the Old Testament, and the Bible is divided into two parts, Old and New. The Old Testament is the story of God and Israel, the people that God called to be his people. And most of the Old Testament is about their story and their poetry, and a lot of prophets telling them that things are not going the way they should because they've been disobedient. But Obadiah is different in one way, and that is that Obadiah is not written to the Israelites directly. It's written to the Edomites. Now, Obadiah, as you can see on the screen, means worshiper of God, and it is a very common name. It's a name that you should, if you're having a child, name your child. It's a very common Jewish name. I don't know why there aren't more Obadiahs in our very, fertile church. Come on, or get me some Obadiahs. I want some Obadiahs. I'm going to just change some of your kids' names to Obadiah. Servant of God, worshiper of God, right? Just grab a kid off the street and name him Obadiah. That's what we need to do. Okay. So, Obadiah, we don't know when he was being written, right? It's because we just don't. He doesn't tell us what's happening. He doesn't name any actual nations outside of the Edomites and Israel. So commentators and historians think somewhere between 890 BC and 560 BC. Somewhere in there. There are three different options. Nobody can agree on which option. I would go with the later one, but it doesn't really matter. Now, one other little cool fact about Obadiah before we get moving on. It's the shortest book in the Old Testament. It's 21 verses. All right, so you are going to say when you walk out of here that you will have heard an entire book of the Old Testament. You can impress people with this because we're going to read the whole thing. All right, so what's that? It is the most minor of all minor prophets. Yes, this is true. So what do we know? All right, it is written to the Edomites, but we got to have a little bit of background. So in Genesis chapter 25, there's a story, and it starts with Abraham. And it says that Abraham had a son named Isaac. And Isaac had two children. He had more than that. He had Jacob and Esau from Rebekah. And while Rebekah was pregnant, there was a war going on in her stomach. And Esau and Jacob were punching each other and kicking each other and punching her. And she was so disturbed that she asked God, what the heck is going on? And God said, there are two nations warring in your stomach, which is what every mother wants to hear, right? There are two nations warring in your stomach. And one will serve the other. One will be weaker. The other will be stronger. Now, Jacob is the second. Esau is the first. There's a cool story about how the birthright gets switched around. You should read about it in Genesis. But what you need to know is that Jacob is the father of Israel, who is God's chosen people, and Esau is the father of the Edomites, or Edom, and Edom means red. And most likely when Esau popped out, he was very hairy and very red, or his skin was ruddy. But anyway, two nations. Now, what you need to know, just map-wise, if you know anything about the Middle East, is you got Israel here, and you've got Northern Kingdom, Southern Kingdom. You got Jerusalem, right, and Mount Zion. But then the Edomites are right underneath them, okay? They're right underneath them, and it's all in the mountains. How many of you know about Petra? Anybody know? Anybody? Okay. So Petra is the treasury of the Edomites. You saw it in the Indiana Jones 3, right? Indiana Jones 3. So that if you've seen Indiana Jones 3, then you can get in your mind a picture of kind of what their fortresses look like. They thought they were impenetrable. But you heard a story read by Susan out of Numbers, and this story about Moses and the Israelites and their interaction with Edomites that depicts the way Edom and Israel interact most of their history. Most of the time, Edom is just a thorn in the side of Israel. There are only a very few times where they're very helpful. So if you remember how that story goes, is Moses and Israel is coming up out of Egypt, and they get to the border of the Edomites, and they're like, hey, can we pass through on the King's Highway? And they're like, no. You can't. Don't you remember? Like, everything was bad for us, and now it's going to be good, and we won't even drink your water, and if we do, we'll pay for it. No, you can't. You've got to go around. So they're always making it hard for Israel. So, with that in mind, Obadiah speaks directly to Edom. The question becomes, how do you and I, as followers of Jesus, read a minor, or the minor of minor prophets, as Russ would say, the minor of minor prophets? Well, how do we read that? Because we are not the nation of Israel, and Obadiah is not written to us, and it's not even written for us, right? It's written for Israelites as an encouragement as to what God's going to do to the Edomites, and it explains that, but it's not to us. So how do we read it as followers of Jesus? Well, I think 2 Corinthians 5:18 and following kind of might give us a little bit of a place to begin. So Paul, writing in the New Testament to the Corinthian church, says this: all of this is from God, who reconciled us to himself through Christ and gave us the ministry of reconciliation. That God was reconciling the world to himself in Christ, not counting people's sins against them, and he has committed to us the message of reconciliation. We are therefore Christ's ambassadors, as though God were making his appeal through us. We implore you, on Christ's behalf, be reconciled to God. So if you're a follower of Jesus, outside of your identity as a child of God and as a priest, you have a special office, and that is to be an ambassador. Well, what do ambassadors do? They go to different countries and different peoples, and they say, this is what our country values. This is what our country thinks. How can we be friends? Here's how we think we can do this. But more importantly, they just bring the message of the country or the king. The message of our king is that you need to be reconciled to God through Christ. So if that's our mindset, if we are inviting people to be reconciled to God through Christ, what does Obadiah have to say to us? Well, Obadiah can begin to help us understand what God values. And Obadiah can begin to help us see how bad things play out and how God is going to act. We can begin to understand the way God involves himself with nations. Because as an ambassador, sometimes we think of ourselves as ambassadors to individuals. Right? I'm an ambassador to Larry, and that's true. But I am also an ambassador to the village. And I am also an ambassador to the city of Tucson and an ambassador to this nation. We collectively are ambassadors because we belong to the kingdom of God and we are called to invite people to reconcile. So, Obadiah can help us do that, I think. Can help us think that through. And can maybe work on us a little bit. So, let me go back to the first thing we want to hold on to is Proverbs 16:18 through 19. Pride and inflated ego lead to destruction and fall. We are invited to be with the oppressed and be humble and not enjoy the plunder of those who are arrogant. That's kind of the filter we're going to read with. All right. Obadiah 1 through 9 is about the pride of Edom. So just listen along about Obadiah's vision. The vision of Obadiah. This is what the sovereign Lord says about Edom. We have heard a message from the Lord. An envoy was sent to the nations to say, "Rise, let us go against her for battle. See, I will make you small among the nations. You will be utterly despised. The pride of your heart has deceived you. You who live in the cleft of the rock and make your home on the heights. You who say to yourself, who can bring me down to the ground? Though you soar like the eagle and make your nest among the stars, from there I will bring you down, declares the Lord. If thieves came to you, if robbers in the night, oh, what a disaster awaits you. Would they not steal only as much as they wanted? If grape pickers came to you, would they not leave a few grapes? But how Esau will be ransacked, his hidden treasures pillaged. That would be Petra. All your allies will force you to the border. Your friends will deceive and overpower you. Those who eat your bread will set a trap for you, but you will not detect it. In that day, declares the Lord, will I not destroy the wise men of Edom, those of understanding in the mountains of Esau? The warriors, Teman, the biggest tribe of Edom, will be terrified, and everyone in Esau's mountain will be cut down and slaughtered. So you might have heard more than I heard, but at least there's three things that kind of hit me as I listened to the accusations and destruction of Edom. One was that their pride and the deception of their pride really lay in their feeling safe because of all of their fortresses, the way that they could stay away from everyone, right? That no one was going to conquer them. So they were proud about their safety, the way they had built their different fortresses. The second one was there was a sense that they're proud about their wisdom, their ability to understand what's going on around them, and their prestige in that wisdom. They were proud of their wise men. And third, it seems that they were proud of their ability to be connected to everybody and kind of be everybody's buddy, right? They had their crew and they were safe and no one could get them and they had wise men, right? And they were deceived. And as I was reading this and I was thinking about being an ambassador, I began to think about my own nation that I live in. Because I don't know if you remember last week when we talked about Amos, chapter 1 was all about other nations outside of Israel and the judgment that was on them. And a lot of that judgment had to do with the way they treated one another. But I was thinking about these things, and I was thinking about my own pride, and I was thinking about how in our nation, before the Twin Towers were attacked, you could go to the airport and you could twirl in circles and show them your gun and get on the plane, right? I mean, it's an exaggeration, but the difference between security on a plane and security everywhere, really, pre-tower attack and post-tower tower attack, is remarkably different, right? All of a sudden, we did not feel safe anymore. But before that, the thing that we felt as a nation was we were impenetrable. Nobody was going to attack us. In fact, I remember having conversations with my friends about how that would just be ludicrous and impossible. And yet it happened. And what did we clamp down on? Safety. We went crazy. We need to be safe. We need to make sure we're safe again, right? Our pride was hit and we felt afraid. But also, we as a nation, and I'm saying all this because we belong to this nation. We are citizens of this nation, most of us, and we vote, we have opinions, and we think about it, right? We have a pride in our ability to be technologically advanced and smart, and to be at the top in everything, right? And we have a confidence in our allies and in our military strength. We have a pride. We think we know what's best. Right? You and I, as ambassadors of Christ, calling people to reconcile, have to have something to say to the pride of our country. God's inviting us to say things, to look at it, to analyze it, to say pride comes before destruction and an inflated ego before a fall. Like, we're called to say that as ambassadors. Right? But think about it even when it comes to our sports, the Olympics. All of a sudden, everyone is a fan during the Olympics. But none of you are rooting for Denmark. Okay, maybe one of you. But no one's rooting for Denmark. You root for America, which is fine. It's okay to have that. But there is almost a hostility that happens in the way that we understand who we are, and we better be getting more medals than everybody else, because that would make our country look bad if we didn't. There's a little bit of that narrative, right? There is a pride that blinds us. Now this is important, because as ambassadors, we're called to speak to that. But that's not the only place that this happens. If you bring it down a notch to just the village has pride. Now, pride is not being proud of your kid is not wrong. But when pride brings you to the place where it's about you providing yourself with safety, and you are the person who brings wisdom, and you're the person who creates strength, there's a danger in you stepping down the wrong path. And we'll talk about that a bit. But as a church, it's not hard to think, oh, we do this better than everybody else. Or we're different, and that's more important, right, than other people. We have some secret knowledge or some secret philosophy that's better somehow. Right? It's easy to slip into that. But think about you individually. Now it gets a little bit more nuanced. All of you struggle with pride because you're human. Right? You struggle with it in the sense that there are places that you think you're better than other people. Because I know, because you're like me and you're judgmental. And I've heard you talk about. I've heard you judge people. You've heard me judge people. That means I'm arrogant. Right? So we have to, part of being an ambassador and inviting people to reconcile, what Obadiah is inviting us into is not to have our pride deceive us and to get to the place where we begin to be God and think that we are the originator of our safety and of our wisdom and of our strength. So, the big because. The second part of Obadiah is to explain why these consequences are coming against Edom. It says, because of the violence against your brother Jacob, you will be covered with shame. You will be destroyed forever. On the day you stood aloof while strangers carried off his wealth and foreigners entered his gates and cast lots from Jerusalem, you were like one of them. You should not gloat over your brother in the day of his misfortune, nor rejoice over the people of Judah in the day of their destruction, nor boast so much in the day of their troubles. You should not march through the gates of my people in the day of disaster, nor gloat over them in their calamity in the day of their disaster, nor seize their wealth in the day of their disaster. You should not wait at the crossroads to cut down their fugitives, nor hand over their survivors in the day of their trouble. A couple things here. The reason that there are consequences for them is that they were violent against Israel. They enjoyed Israel's suffering. They took advantage of their weakness, and they joined in with the oppression. Now, you might look at these and say, oh, I've never done any of those, right? But I think you have to really catch on to what God is saying here, because it goes back to Proverbs 16:19. What happens when you're proud and you're arrogant is that you miss oppression. You miss the weak. You miss the one who is suffering. You enjoy their suffering with no knowledge that they're suffering, in a sense. Right? You miss it. The reason that pride goes before destruction and haughty spirit before a fall is because you miss what's going on around you because you're so wrapped up in yourself. And when you're so wrapped up in yourself, you find yourself to be shamed. Now, let me just illustrate this in an easy way, in a silly way, but it's kind of what we do in this, is my wife and I love playing this board game called Raiders of the North Sea. It's a lot to set up, so we got the digital app. And we play it on the digital app because you don't have to set it up, and it's a half-hour game. So the way we kind of enter into playing this game always starts like this. So you lost last time, you ready to lose again? Right? You want to play? You want to go? Right? We kind of have this little trash talking thing that happens. The problem is, she's much better at it than I am. So when I trash talk and I lose, I'm like, I feel stupid. And not only do I feel stupid, I feel ashamed. I'm like, man, my wife is so much smarter and better. I don't know how she does this. And I get mad at her. And sometimes I kind of come up with explanations as to why she beat me and to lower her ability, like the glory that she should get for winning. Right? I begin to oppress. That's one way. Well, let's talk about another way that this happens. And these are just ways to kind of illustrate so that you can kind of get the feeling of it in a grander scale. But the chess tournament, the super chill chess tournament, right? Chess is a game that has no chance. It is a game of quote-unquote intelligence, in a sense, because the only way that you can really lose chess is by making a stupid mistake. You don't know how many people in the super chill chess tournament I have talked to who have just said, I wouldn't have lost if I hadn't made that stupid mistake. And a number of people even said to me, I'm bitter because I lost. Right? In the super chill. Now, partly they were talking in jest, but the reality there is that there is a pride in how smart you are. And chess feeds that. Right? It feeds that in a sense because of how beautifully the game is designed when there really isn't any chance. But you see kind of what happens here. Now, the reason that the Edomites are being punished, the reason that God is giving them consequences is that they enjoyed the destruction of Israel and took advantage of it. Just jump one verse forward, Obadiah 1:15. It says, the day of the Lord is near for all nations. As you have done, it will be done to you. Your deeds will return upon your head, your own head. I think that's a little sobering as followers of Jesus, because the countries we are in, God says both in Amos 1 and 2 and in Obadiah, are going to be held accountable for the way they treat other nations. Edom, in fact, theologically, always represents every nation when it comes to consequences. And so I think it's important for us to think about that because we will be held as accountable for how we treat Mexico and Canada and the rest of the world. And guess what? Mexico will be held accountable for the way they treat. And Canada, we're all going to be held accountable, is what Obadiah is saying. And as followers of Jesus and ambassadors, it is important for us to address the arrogance and pride of ourselves, of our community, and our nation. And that means we have to use our voice and our actions to speak and to act in the behalf of those who are oppressed, because that's how that works, right? Now, Obadiah 17-21, I'm going to finish an Old Testament book for you, and you can say now that you have heard an entire book of the Old Testament. But on Mount Zion will be deliverance. It will be holy, and Jacob will possess his inheritance. Jacob will be a fire and Joseph's flame. Esau will be a stubble, and they will set him on fire and destroy him. There will be no survivors from Esau. The Lord has spoken. People from Negev will occupy the mountains of Esau, and people from the foothills will possess the land of the Philistines. They will occupy the fields of Ephraim and Samaria, and Benjamin will possess Gilead. This company of Israelite exiles who are in Canaan will possess the land as far as Zarephath. The exiles from Jerusalem who are in Sephahad will possess the towns of Negev. Deliverers will go up on Mount Zion to govern the mountains of Esau, and the kingdom will be the Lord's. So there are two mountains, Mount Zion, or Jerusalem, the city of God, right? And so what he's saying is that mountain will be lifted up and deliverance will be there, and Esau and the mountains of Edom will be brought down. Their fortress will be broken. They won't own them anymore. They will be removed. Now, when the Old Testament says that a nation is wiped out, it is not meaning the nation is wiped out completely. It means that they are no longer a nation, but they're still people of Esau wandering around. Now, the important verse here, though, is in verse 17, because in verse 17, it says, "But on Mount Zion will be deliverance." And I started thinking about this word deliverance and what does it mean here. And so I went and looked up deliverance, and this is a really interesting word because as in Hebrew, often it is a word picture. And what it is this idea that here, just imagine there's a woman and she's having a baby and I'm attempting to deliver the baby, right? And in a sense, this is the birthing of all that God is talking about. And I'm trying to do it. I'm trying to make it happen. And then all of a sudden, David Crawford, Dr. Crawford, comes by and says, "Eric, what are you doing?" And he knocks me out of the way and says, "Let me deliver the baby." And that's what he's saying when he says there will be deliverance, that there's going to be a deliverance on Mount Zion and a resettling of everything. And God will be Lord over everything. And that happens in Jesus. And I think Romans 8 through 11 illustrates this very well when Paul says, "But God demonstrates his own love for us. While we were still sinners, Christ died for us. Since we have now been justified by his blood, how much more shall we be saved from God's wrath through him? For if while we were God's enemies, his proud people, the proud people who were God's enemy, we were reconciled to him through the death of his Son, how much more, having been reconciled, shall we be saved through his life? Not only is this so, but we also boast in God through our Lord Jesus Christ, through whom we have now received reconciliation." Christ is our deliverance. That while we were arrogant and proud, while we were headed for destruction and a fall, while we have ignored the oppressor or the oppressed and been the oppressor, Christ died for us. That is the message of the ambassador, that what we take from Obadiah is to go around and say, you know what? Your pride is going to lead you for destruction. Your pride has blinded you. But be reconciled to God because he loved you and died for you, and you can move in a different direction. You can move in a different direction. And here's the beautiful thing about that different direction. Deuteronomy 23:7a. "Do not despise an Edomite, for the Edomites are related to you." What is so powerful that to me is that while Esau and while Edom harassed, took advantage of, killed and murdered. In fact, there's a story, if you go back to 70 AD, or not back forward to 70 AD, when the Romans are sieging Jerusalem, the Edomites are like, "Hey, we'll come help you." And they're led into the city of Jerusalem, and then they just murder a ton of people. Right? This is who Edom is. This is their nature. And yet, what God says in Deuteronomy is, do not despise. Some translations say, do not abhor an Edomite. For an Edomite, But the Edomites are related to you. They're your brothers. They're your family. That is the message of the ambassador. Is that while you are being oppressed and while you are being taken advantage of, Christ didn't just die for you, he died for the oppressor. And that the appeal is, no. Through Christ's love, we need to see the brotherhood that God has given us. I think Obadiah 1 is written for the Israelites to have some comfort and know that God is going to handle the injustice that's happened to them. But it's also to maybe appeal to everyone else to move away from their pride before they end up in destruction and they're deceived by their own power. With that, I suspect I have a little bit of time, and I would love to entertain your conversation and questions. So there's a mic right there. If somebody wants to run mic. If anyone has a question, a comment, wants a little bit more information, go for it. Oh, wow.
Okay, now we're serious.
Well, we don't have to have any discussion or any questions. The morning service had a ton of questions. And over there, Corey has a thought, a question.
I guess a while ago I ended up having a falling out with a member of the church. It doesn't really matter who, it's not important. But I'm looking at this from Deuteronomy up there on the screen, and I'm thinking, yeah, maybe the person I've been feuding with is an Edomite, and maybe I should just be more willing to let this go and not be despising Edomites because Edomites are related to you. So that's kind of making me think as I've been festering about this for a while. So I appreciate that because it's putting stuff in perspective for me that wasn't really in perspective before.
Thank you for offering that, Corey. Anybody else have thoughts, questions? Russ.
Kind of connected to that, I was thinking about how Edom had been celebrating all the bad things that had happened to Israel, and that from their cultural perspective, they probably viewed Israel as their historic oppressors.
Yes.
And so they say, the oppressor is finally getting what's coming to them.
Sure.
And that's what they're denounced for. And then Israel has this same question. Are we going to flip it around, and are we going to laugh in the face of Edom as they get destroyed? Or are we going to not despise them?
Thanks, Russ. That's really good. Anybody else? Thoughts? Questions? All right. Well, in the morning service, right as I was wrapping up and just about to pray, I got interrupted because for those of you who know Jim and Tessie Roth, they usually go to the morning service, but they've been here for about a year and a half or so. Their daughter's really good friend was in a car accident where the car flipped over like 6 times, and for no apparent reason. And she was in surgery at that moment. I haven't heard about what's happened, but she's okay, but her arms are severely messed up, and so they had to basically reconstruct them, it sounded like. So it is, Of course, now I'm going to blank their oldest daughter's name. Esther, thank you. I should remember that. Good biblical name. Esther didn't want her name out, but so you can just pray for Esther's friend. That would be really good and I think encouraging. And also Esther's family, because her dad is, it happened out of state. And he's the only one with her right now. So pray for her dad as he kind of has to wrestle with being there while his daughter is in so much pain and so much suffering. So anyway, I just wanted to put that out there before I pray. So let's pray. Father, thank you that you're always poking us and always asking us to look inside and to look at what is motivating us and to look at how we understand ourselves and how we view our value. Father, I just want to again lift up Esther's friend and ask that you would wrap them, the whole family, and in particular her friend, in your hands, and that there would be a miraculous healing to her body and that her family would know you in a deeper way. Father, I just pray that you bless the food that we're going to eat and bless the words that come from our mouth as we sing. I ask all of this in your holy name. Amen.